Türkiye'nin ekonomi televizyonundan herkese merhaba. Ben Saida Zahidova ve bugünkü özel röportajımızda tüm dünyayı ilgilendiren en önemli konulardan birini ele alacağız. Tabii ki ABD ve Çin arasında yaşanan ticaret savaşları. Özellikle ABD Başkanı Donald Trump'ın iktidara geldikten sonra en önemli stratejinin odak noktalarından biri ise Washington ve Pekin ilişkileriydi ve yaklaşık 3 yıldır devam eden ticaret savaşları her iki ülkenin ekonomisinin yanı sıra küresel ticarette küresel piyasaları ve ticareti olumsuz yönde etkilemeye devam ediyor. Aslında ticaret savaşları bir anlamda da küreselleşmenin kaçınılmaz sonuçlarından biridir de diyebiliriz. Ve 3 Kasım'da ABD seçimleri var ve bu seçim sonuçları ticaret savaşlarının boyutunu ve yönünü belirleyecektir. Peki ABD ve Çin arasında yaşanan bu gerginlik ve bu rekabet yeni bir soğuk savaş dönemine mi gidiyor? Bunu hep beraber Obama ve Bush yönetimi sırasında Beyaz Saray'da Milli Güvenlik Konseyi Genel Sekreteri Yardımcısı olarak görev yapan ve Amerikalı diplomat olan Jeff Moon ile değerlendireceğiz. Thanks for joining us today, Mr. Moon.
My pleasure.
Let's talk about the China and USA topic. I would like to say that it's one of the most important topic in the world, and it's in everybody's mind that people are discussing what will happen between the China and USA trade war. It's actually a war between these two countries that with no tanks and guns, but most importantly, it's with tariffs and Twitter feeds. How do you analyze the soft Cold War between these two countries? Like before you start, I just want to say that it's actually differences between 20th century and 21st century's soft Cold War. I can say. So what do you say about this dispute?
Right. Well, we currently think in the news about developments in the U.S. trade war with China as if this just happened, but actually the roots are much deeper than that. When I first visited China in 1984, China was a very poor country. When China entered into the WTO around 2000, China was still very much a developing country, and China promised to become a market economy and to transform itself. For the first few years after WTO, China kept with that commitment, but China has not become a market economy. In addition, another major factor here is that in the early days of the US-China relationship, the relationship was complementary because China supplied low-cost labor, US supplied technology and equipment. That has now changed as well, that China now wants to become a peer competitor. So when China first came into the WTO, it received lots of benefits. It was able to close off large parts of its economy from foreign competition because it really wasn't able to compete. It was able to get benefits that the world's poorest countries were able to get so that it could get an economic leg up. Now that China wants to become a peer competitor, it doesn't want to give up those benefits. It still wants to claim that it is a developing country, just like the countries of, say, West Africa are. And that's just, we all know that's just not the case. China has launched the Belt and Road Initiative with billions and billions of dollars. China is not a developing country. And so the real cause of the current trade war is that China is not a market economy, even though it promised to, and it still walls off large parts of its economy, claiming it's a developing country when it wants to compete directly with the United States. And China's latest industrial policy, the China 2025 initiative, wants to compete at the highest levels of technology. And explicitly in the plan, which you can read for yourself, the plan is to develop technologies to prevent foreign companies from having access to the China market and then capturing world markets. And if you want the world trading system to work, you have to sell something and you have to buy something on both sides. So China wants the benefit, but not the responsibility. And that's why the trade war started under Donald Trump. The frustration of the unemployment that was caused by the unfair relationship and China's unwillingness to open its markets. And so we went through this trade war, and after 2 years, Donald Trump agreed to a settlement that effectively consisted of China purchasing goods, but not making any of the changes that are required to level the playing field and ease toward becoming a market economy. And so now that China has refused to make those changes voluntarily, we are in this conflict right now. And this is not going to go away. This is going to continue indefinitely until China decides it's actually going to open its market.
Can we actually say that we are entering the new world order then?
I think it's a bit too early to say that because things are so fluid right now. There are, predicting anything in this age is dangerous. Who would have thought 1 year ago that we would be in the middle of a worldwide pandemic? And another major factor here is the U.S. election. I think will have an enormous impact on the U.S.-China trade relationship. And I think the situation in China is going to have an impact. I think that China, during the trade negotiations, after a couple years, back in May of last year, there was a comprehensive agreement on the table that would address some of the purchase requirements, but also the industrial policy issues that are really at the heart of the trade agreement or of the trade problem. This is things like forced technology transfer and subsidies for state-owned enterprises. And China backed off from that. China refused to adopt a comprehensive agreement. I think China is going to regret that eventually, because what has happened is that our failure to reach that kind of comprehensive agreement has caused the trade war to move on in different areas that are unpredictable. And so whether there's a new world order or not that's coming, it's possible, but certainly not definite.
But why do you say that China will regret it? Like, don't you think that China has its own rights and they're like they just want to improve their economy as well? Why should they regret?
Oh, of course, China has the right to adopt its own policies and develop things as it wants to. Mm-hmm. If, however, China wants to have a fruitful relationship, not only just with the United States, but with the other market economies. The Europeans and the Japanese and the Australians and others have similar kinds of issues with China. China could have, back in May of last year, got well along the way of resolving all of those issues. And instead, what we have now is a volatile environment. And what the U.S. is doing is basically saying, you do not want to change if you will not voluntarily level the playing field for foreign companies, then we are at our own choosing going to impose reciprocity on your companies. We are not going to allow you to do in the United States what we're not allowed to do in China, which sounds kind of fair. And so under Trump, there's also a lot of rhetoric and bluster and very unhelpful talk, but it's the main thrust. And China could have avoided a lot of that had it gone to a comprehensive agreement.
Yeah. I mean, both sides, I believe, they're threatening each other for a long time, but the tension between China and USA is higher than ever, I believe, because Beijing ordered the closing USA consulate, and in relation for the Trump administration demand that China shut down its consulate in Houston. Where do we go from here? I mean, how the trade relation will be shaped after this?
Well, I used to be in charge of the consulate that China shut down in China, so I appreciate what is happening here. As I said, though, because China failed to agree on a comprehensive agreement, we are now imposing reciprocity on each other. And so there are a variety of actions that are taking place. There's reciprocity in terms of diplomatic representation, in terms of technology theft, in terms of China's ability to list companies in the United States when the U.S. can't, do the same. There are sanctions on Hong Kong and on Xinjiang as well. So this is really spinning out of control, and I really do think that we need to get back to the table and sort of the relationship and try to come back to some kind of comprehensive understanding.
I see. But when you mentioned the technology, let me ask that question, one of the important questions. Let's say the battle over the 5th generation telecom technology and the Huawei has become the ground on which the USA and China tech war is being fought. The 5G market is actually expected to reach, which is the high number, is $48 billion by 2027. But more importantly, it's expected to drive the trillions of dollars of economic output over the installed 5G networks. So any company or any country that controls the 5G technology that will have an advantage over the others in economic and technological space. So how do you think that both countries will react, and who is going to be the winner at the end of it? Who will control the 5G, let's say that?
It's too soon to know who's going to be the winner. There are a number of questions that need to be resolved. One is the technology itself. There are several versions of 5G. Not clear which one is going to win out. There's also the question of national security.
Yeah.
It's clear. China has for years used national security to block American technology companies. As you probably know, Google, Facebook,
Exactly.
LinkedIn, all of these companies that are enormous value in terms of the U.S. stock market are completely blocked. There is a sense, though, that Huawei, in terms of its activities, may or may not be a threat to national security, and countries around the world, including the United States, are evaluating and taking measures accordingly. So those are just some of the factors that are out there. But I really have to emphasize the technology. The technology is moving so fast that it's hard to predict where we're going to be in a year or 2 or 5 years.
I see. I don't want to leave the Asia right now, so I want to go to the Taiwan issue. That as Taiwan rejects the Chinese one country, two system, do you think Taiwan will be the next domino to go, or do you think Taiwan is going to benefit from most of the USA-China trade war?
Well, I was an American diplomat for 21 years, and in all of my meetings with Chinese diplomats, they will say pretty early on that the most sensitive and most important issue for China is Taiwan.
Exactly.
U.S. policy has always been ambiguous on Taiwan, that basically the Chinese people need to decide who's going to be in charge of China. But there's been a one China policy. I am, however, anxious about the future of Taiwan. The reason is that as you look at Hong Kong, what has happened in Hong Kong, China promised autonomy for Hong Kong for years. And that was an international agreement that was negotiated over 15 years or so and deposited at the United Nations with an enormous amount of money. And yet China has basically walked away from it and cracked down on Hong Kong. When Hong Kong was handed over when the British handed over Hong Kong to China, there was serious talk about one country, two systems in Hong Kong, but maybe one country, three systems including Taiwan as well, that if things went well in Hong Kong, Taiwan would also come back into the fold. Well, I think that's out of the question. And the question now is what China will have been extremely aggressive, I think, in Hong Kong. And there's cause for concern with regard to Taiwan. I think if China were to invade Taiwan, then our world will become a very different and much more complicated and much more dangerous place. And China, about its peaceful rise, will be over. And we will come into the world order.
Do you think China is acting aggressively or USA aggressively? Because I think both sides are benefiting economically from Taiwan. And who is acting more aggressively then?
Well, I don't know. We can go back and forth on what both sides are doing. I think that China's, around the world, China has become significantly more aggressive this year, to China's detriment. You have what they call wolf warrior diplomats that are making extremely aggressive statements, unlike the Chinese diplomats of previous years. There are repeated violations of Taiwan airspace by Chinese jets, and other symbolic activities that are going on. Both of these kinds of activities, I think, express concern on sides. I really worry. The thing that worries me most about U.S.-China relations is an accident. There have been a history of accidents that have happened that have really caused enormous problems in the relationship. What it would take is boats bumping together or planes bumping together or some kind of unintended activity to really make the situation complicated. And this is a particularly dangerous time because there is zero trust on both sides and a lot of active distrust. And in the States, we are in the middle of a presidential election. And for political reasons, nobody, the Republicans or the Democrats, can show any weakness on the China issue.
Yeah. As we know that the election is on November, 3rd of November, and do we expect any better relations between these two countries before the
I would
election?
like to say yes. Yeah, I'd like to say yes, but the reality is no. Trump is in a very, let's say, defensive situation. He was hoping to run on the economy, and that has not gone well for him. The COVID-19 crisis has not been handled well. He tends to try to divert attention from his own deficiencies when he gets into trouble, and China is a convenient issue for him, and you see it in his rhetoric. And he seems to do it in a haphazard and unplanned way. So on the American side, I don't think there's any possibility of improvement. On the Chinese side, I think the Chinese have tried to show restraint, but as I said, these wolf warrior diplomats that have now been empowered to use extremely strong language against foreign countries. I mean, the Chinese ambassador in Australia called Australia's shoe a gum on China's shoe, which to me is just, as a former diplomat, is completely unthinkable. And so I hope that restraint will prevail on both sides, but it's going to be tricky over the next couple of months.
It will be, exactly. But some analysts say that if Trump administration is elected again, Trump will use strong language, but if the Biden wins the election, then his foreign policy maybe will mean good for both countries' relations. Do you think Biden use more, make the language more civilized for the relationship?
I do. I think that I do. I think when we talk about relations and what Biden will do, we need to remember that China is not going to be the top of mind issue for Biden. For Biden, the top issues are going to be the COVID-19 crisis and race relations in the United States. And then China will come after that in priorities. Having said that, though, I think Biden will do several things that will be very different. Biden will work much more with our allies, Europeans and others. And I think he'll be more successful in doing that. He has a long history in foreign relations. Unlike Trump, who had no government experience, Biden has been doing this for decades and knows a lot of these world leaders and will be able to marshal allies. I think that's one thing. Another thing is that Biden is fully familiar with the foreign policy process in the United States. I worked in the National Security Council in the White House, and I know there is a very formal and structured process for making sure that every foreign policy issue is carefully analyzed, all the alternatives are thought through, the president is briefed, and we get the best possible outcome. With Trump, he has completely avoided that process. And that's why we get some of these very erratic and emotional decisions that later on need to be explained away or otherwise disregarded. With Biden, that's not going to happen. We're going to get a very logical process. And we are also going to get a different tone, as you asked. We're going to get a more presidential tone. It's going to be less like school children talking on the schoolyard and more presidential and well thought out, well reasoned and logical. And I think that is something that is much overdue these days.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, that Biden's one of the top issues will not be China, but I think it will be Europe, because right now there's a trade war going on between USA and Europe, and how do you see that, the trade war between USA and Europe? I mean, it's in a strategic dilemma. How will Germany take an action then?
Well, I think that, first of all, Trump has gone out of his way to say that America comes first and the allies certainly come second, and he has insulted a number of our allies, which is extremely unwise and inappropriate. And so I think the first thing is that Biden will patch up relations on a formal level. There are differences between us and the Europeans on trade issues. Prior to the Trump administration, we found some way to manage those issues in a much more polite way, and I think we're going to return to that. So the issues will need to be resolved, But I think that Biden will find a way to address those issues without fracturing the entire relationship, without fracturing NATO or taking the EU onto task. I mean, I think we need to find a better way to manage things.
How the international organization will take a position?
Well, I think
World Trade
Trump
Organization,
has,
NATO.
yeah, Trump has either withdrawn or threatened to withdraw from most of the U.S. multilateral agreements, and I think Biden has just the opposite attitude.
Exactly.
And I share that attitude that the U.S. Can be a strong country, but we're much, much stronger with all of our allies working together. And Trump, for some reason, seemed to understand that, but I think that that's going to be one of the major thrusts going forward if Biden becomes our president.
Okay. I would like to stay in the election part. It's been said in media that Russia is influencing the election and China taking a side, and at the same time, Europe is forced to take a side. What's your opinion about this?
Well, I don't think that Europe is forced to take a side in the U.S. election. I do think that Russia has been very actively interfering in our election. Yesterday, a Senate committee chaired by a Republican of the president's party came out with a report documenting all of the connections between Russia and the Trump campaign and Russia's many efforts to influence the U.S. election. So this is well documented. It's well known. Our intelligence community tells us that Russian efforts are continuing. And I think there will be efforts to not only understand and turn that back, but also American voters now understand that this is happening. And that explains a lot of Trump's behavior, I think, as well. So that Russian preference for Trump, I think, is well known, and it will not have as much of an impact on this election as it did the last election. As for Chinese attitudes, the American intelligence representative issued a statement saying that China would actually prefer to have Biden because they don't want to have the unpredictability under Trump. I've heard it both ways. A number of scholars in Beijing have said that actually China wants Trump because he is dismantling U.S. alliances and U.S. power overseas and is therefore much better for China's interests, despite the fact that he is so volatile and difficult to work with. So I see that both ways, and frankly, I tend to look at things in the way that the Chinese scholars do. And I suspect that in the long term, a Trump presidency, which is so volatile and destructive, is better for China's interests.
I see. Do you think the USA-China dispute and the trade war is the opportunity for Turkey?
I don't know that it's an opportunity. I think that for a lot of countries, Turkey included, they probably don't want to take sides in all of this. I know that Turkey has split interests. Turkey is a member of NATO on the one hand, but on the other hand, it's also a member of the Belt and Road Initiative. And I see that the Turkish Sovereign Wealth Fund has committed up to $5 billion to perhaps participate in your Middle Corridor Initiative and other things. On the other hand, I assume people in Turkey are concerned about what's happening with the Uyghurs in China, and there may be concern about Chinese policies in that respect. I think that Turkey, there have been voices in Turkey that have expressed concern about participating in BRI, will cause debt for China or for Turkey. And there are certainly a number of countries around the world that have had that problem. So as these trade tensions continue, I suspect Turkey will do its best not to take sides, to try to find benefit where it can, and to probably maintain stable relations on both sides.
I see. Thank you very much for joining us today. It was great to listen to you, and hope to see you in another program.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure to join you.
Thank you. Bugünkü röportajımızda ABD-Çin arasındaki ticaret savaşlarını konuştuk. 3 Kasım'da olacak ABD seçimlerinin ticaret savaşlarına etkisini değerlendirdik. Bir dahaki programda görüşmek dileğiyle, hoşça kalın.